what is a crisis prevention plan? A crisis prevention plan is a plan that is developed, but most importantly, developed by both the consumer and the staff. Do it before the crisis occurs. In most of our dealings, we tend to get together after an event has occurred. So you want to get together with the consumer, never leave the consumer out. You want to understand that a crisis prevention plan is a therapeutic process. It's intended to be malleable. It's not a plan that is written in stone and never to be changed. It is a task that sensitizes individuals about trauma. So it is an evaluation and a plan that is trauma sensitive. It's a partnership to keep people safe. Lastly, a consumer-owned plan doesn't necessarily have to be completely written by the consumer, but they have to own it, and the only way that they can own it is to be a part of its development. Therefore, the language should not be above mark. Keep it simple and easy to understand. Why do we use crisis prevention plans? We use them to help the consumers during the earliest stages of their de-escalation or escalation before it gets to a response. So we're trying to, again, use a tool that's going to keep it at the stimulus or the trigger level. We're also helping them to identify certain coping strategies before they're actually needed. We use the tool also to help the staff plan ahead and know what to do when they see someone being triggered. When they see them headed towards the response pattern, they have a reference material where they can say these are the alternative strategies that the person can employ, and whether they are or they're not, you're able to then put that cognitive intervention in that would be helpful. Lastly, to help staff use interventions that reduce the risk of trauma and re-traumatization to the individuals they serve. The origin of all of this, I mentioned in the first slide about the necessity to eliminate or reduce seclusion and restraint. But I want to talk about an issue through a consumer activist named Laura Prescott. She, being a consumer activist as well as an attorney, got together with the Department of Mental Health Commissioner and expressed their concerns about how negative seclusion and restraint was on survivors of trauma. One had never looked at trauma in that sense, that the plausibility of putting someone in seclusions or restraint would have any effect on individuals who've been traumatized. As a result of this interaction, a task force was formed, and out of the task force, tools to begin to manage crisis and avoid usage of restraint and seclusion was grown, and has now grown into its present perspective of looking at trauma-sensitive tools and trauma-informed care as an element and an offering to reduce or eliminate seclusion and restraint. When we're looking at some of the processes of trauma-sensitive tools, the first thing we need to do is understand the process. And again, a definition of a trigger is anything that sets off an action. The triggers may be anything too, such as fear, panic, being upset, being agitated. These are also referred to as threat cues. Some things we may understand directly, some things we may not. For instance, bedtime is a trigger for some individuals. Why? Because when you look at their history and you ask the appropriate questions as to what happened to them, many will tell you that it was bedtime when the sexual abuse would occur. Room checks, another issue, the whys of it. Again, for the same reason. Coming in as flashing flashlights would be quite often triggering. Large men, yelling, people being too close. Also looking at a host of other things. There was a poll taken that illustrates the point that's first on this list here. When they asked adolescents, what is it that they wanted most from their parents? One could speculate that they would ask for money, they would ask for love, they would ask for something along those lines. 88% of the adolescents answered they wanted to be heard. So you can see that would be a trigger as well, not being listened to, feeling lonely, being teased or picked, feeling pressured, loud noises. But the last one on this list, contact with family. We quite often miss that piece. More triggers, again, particular times of year. We talk about anniversary effects over and over again. We just need to understand that everyone's history is unique. and we need to ask and incorporate in order to discover more. Taking a look at early warning signs, because the early warning signs tell us a lot of information that helps to get a quick jump start, if you will, on their triggers, traumatic reminders, or traumas that will help to keep it at the stimulus level. Some of the signals are not observable. We may miss some of these early warning signs, but others that we may catch would be things like feeling restless, seeing the person agitated, pacing, breathing, sensations of tightness in their chest, sweatiness, and the host of other symptoms that you may see as early warning signs: wringing of hands, shortness of breath, rocking, can't sit still, singing inappropriately. These are things we observe every single day in the population that we serve. One of the nurses that I was working with told me, "I know when John's about to really lose it." Tell me, how do you know that? She says, "Because John's leg starts shaking. And when John's legs start shaking, he suddenly becomes very vigilant and he starts punching people." So I asked the nurses, "Well, when you see John's legs shake, what do you do?" And her answer was, "I get out of there." And this is the piece that we need to look at when we're talking about development of crisis plans, when we're talking about intervention strategies. We need to take a look at the fact that if we recognize the trigger, rather than wait for the response, that is the negative response, to occur, we need to discuss this in the plan so that treatment strategies and alternatives can be given. And the last slide here talks about strategies. And the strategies are, and I wish I could highlight this in front of you, individually specific calming mechanisms. And I'll reiterate that. The strategies are individualized. They're individualized based on the first slide that talked about the consumer being in the room and a part of the development of their tools. And they're specific calming mechanisms that help to manage and to minimize their stressors. Some of the options here that are listed: getting away from the stressful situation. Now, if you recall from the biopsychosocial impact of trauma, we talked about the social environmental intervention. And we talked about sometimes the simple thing of getting a person away from the stressful situation being highly effective in reversing the trigger or the stimulus. Going for a walk, talking to someone who will listen, working out, even lying down, listening to peaceful music. And I want to point out that as we examine our own systems, when we look at these options, quite often again the book perspective comes out that says that we're unable to allow the person to lie down because they're not allowed to go upstairs until 3 o'clock, and it's not 3 o'clock. That least listening to peaceful music is not possible because if you give them a radio, everyone else in the unit will want a radio. There are so many reasons we use in our strategies, but if we are going to do anything that is going to be helpful, there are two pieces that I'll leave you with. The first piece is to assume, number one, that whatever strategies are going to be employed for the individual, not the group. And lastly, begin to explore unique options that would be beneficial for the client. Thank you.